The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. She knew this because she had looked at the screen 3 times after it ended, once to confirm what she was seeing, once because she did not believe what she had confirmed, and once because looking at it a 3rd time was the only action available to her, and she had to do something with her hands besides let them shake. The number she had dialed was not the number she meant to dial. She had meant to dial her sister. She had her sister's number memorized because she had been told by the counselor she saw on Thursdays that memorizing one number was a safety protocol, just one, the one person. So that if the phone was taken or broken, or if her hands were shaking the way they were shaking now, and she could not see the screen clearly, she could dial by memory in the dark. She had practiced it. She knew the number. She had been dialing the number. She had dialed wrong. She did not know whose number she had dialed. She did not know whose voice had answered, low and even, and slightly rough with the particular quality of a man pulled from something else. A man who answered every call this way, because every call had to be answered this way, because he was not a man who could afford to telegraph surprise. She did not know what she had said in the first few seconds, whether she had said anything coherent, or whether it had been the breathing and the sound of the other room that had told him everything before she found words. She knew what he had said. She had said, at some point, finding the words the way you found them when the system that generated words had other priorities, haltingly, out of sequence. I'm sorry. I dialed wrong. I'm sorry. And he had said, don't hang up. She had not hung up. She had said, and this was the part she kept returning to, the part that lived in her chest as something between terror and the specific vertiginous feeling of a rope appearing in a place where you had stopped looking for ropes. She had said, I don't know who you are. And he had said, you don't need to. Are you somewhere safe right now? She had looked at the bathroom door. The lock she had turned, the towel bar she had wedged under the handle, which she understood was not a real barrier, but was the barrier available to her, and she had used it. She had looked at the window, 4 feet up the wall, too small to matter but present, offering the particular comfort of an exit that was also not a real exit. She had said, not really. He had not asked if she was hurt. He had not asked for her name. He had not said, I'll call the police, or have you tried calling the police, or any of the other things that people who did not understand the geometry of her situation said when they were trying to be helpful and did not have the information required to be helpful. He had said, send me the address. 4 words. She had been standing in a bathroom with a towel bar under the door handle, and a man whose number she had dialed by mistake had said, send me the address, and her thumb had moved to the text message screen before she had consciously decided to let it. She had sent the address. The call had ended 4 minutes and 11 seconds after it started. Now she was sitting on the edge of the bathtub with her phone in her hands, and she was looking at the message she had sent to a number she did not recognize. And she was doing the accounting that she had done professionally for 6 years and was now doing for herself. What were the variables? What were the possible outcomes? What was the decision tree? And had she just made the worst mistake of a night that had already been the worst night in a long time? Her hands would not stop shaking. Somewhere in the apartment, her husband was still in the living room. She could hear the television. She had 17 minutes. Or she had nothing. It would be one or the other, and she had sent the address, and there was nothing left to do except sit on the edge of the bathtub and wait to find out which. The building where Gio grew up looked nothing like the building where Danielle Mercer had lived for the past 3 years. This was one of the first things she noticed. Later, when she had enough cognitive space to notice things, that the address she had been taken to, in the 2 hours between the bathroom and the end of that night, was an address that cost more per square foot than she had made in her last full year of employment. not because he wanted her to notice. Because it was simply where she was brought, and she was brought there because it was safe, and safe was the only operational requirement that mattered at 2:37 in the morning when a woman had been sitting on the edge of a bathtub for 17 minutes. She noticed the building. She noticed the way the lobby worked, the specific arrangement of sight lines, the placement of the two men who were not doormen, but were standing where doormen stood. She noticed the elevator, which required a key for the upper floors, and which was operated by a man who did not make eye contact until she was safely inside it, and then made it briefly, assessing, filing, and returning to forward-facing. She noticed all of this because she was a social worker, or had been, or still was, in the parts of herself that her husband had not succeeded in reaching. She noticed it, and she filed it. And she walked out of the elevator when it opened, and she stood in the corridor of the upper floor of an apartment building in Chicago's Gold Coast at 2:45 in the morning, and across from her, at the far end of the corridor, a man was standing with his phone in his hand and his coat still on. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment that was longer than the distance between them warranted. He said, "Danielle," and she understood, with the specific, bone-level exhaustion of a woman who had been surviving on adrenaline for the last 2 hours, that she had not given him her name, and that he had it anyway, and that the accounting she was about to undertake was more complex than anything her professional training had prepared her for. She said, "You sent people." "Yes. How many?" "Enough." She looked at him. "My husband is no longer in the apartment," he said. "He won't be going back." She absorbed this. "What does that mean?" "It means he won't be going back," he said. And the way he said it was the way you said a thing that was complete, not a threat, not a promise of specific violence, but the statement of a fact that had already been arranged. The way you stated the weather or the time. She should have been afraid of that. She looked at the man at the end of the corridor, the coat, the phone, the absolute stillness of someone who had not slept and was not going to sleep until the operational requirements of the night were resolved. And she felt, instead of afraid, something she had not felt in 3 years. She felt like something had stopped. If you found this story, you're meant to be here. Before we go further, subscribe, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments below. Every city, every country, every corner of the world showing up in those comments is this family proving it reaches further than I know. Your love is what keeps these stories alive. Now, put everything else down. This one is going to ask something of you. Let's begin. Story deepen. The heroine's wound, Danielle Mercer, had a master's degree in social work from Loyola, a licensure that she had maintained through 6 years of mandatory continuing education and 2 supervisory renewals, and a specific, hard-won expertise in the dynamics of intimate partner violence that she had built 1 intake assessment at a time in a shelter network that served 400 women annually. She knew the cycle. She could diagram it. She had diagrammed it on whiteboards and in training materials and in the careful, non-leading language of intake interviews more times than she could count. Tension building. Incident, reconciliation, calm, repeat. She knew the way it accelerated over time, the way the reconciliation phase contracted and the tension phase expanded, the way the man who had once been sorry became the man who was sorry less often and for shorter durations until sorry was a word that lived in a register he no longer bothered to reach for. She knew the tactics. Isolation, the gradual, plausible erosion of the relationships that provided external reference points, the friendships that became inconvenient, the family calls that became contentious, the professional network that became a source of suspicion. Financial control, not always overt, not always a taken wallet, sometimes just the slow pressure of decisions that made her income less independent. The job that became too demanding, the promotion she did not apply for because the timing wasn't right. Emotional erosion, the specific patient work of making a person doubt their own perceptions until the perceptions themselves became unreliable. She had sat across from women who described these things, and she had recognized them, and she had said, in the careful, validated language of trauma-informed practice, what you're describing is a pattern. It has a name. You are not imagining it. She had believed this completely. She had believed it for other women. She had met Marcus at a conference. He was in nonprofit management, grant writing, program development, the infrastructure side of the social services world, and he had been charming in the way of a man who understood the vocabulary of care and wore it easily. He had known the right language. He had known it because he was smart and because he had been in the field adjacent long enough to learn it. And Danielle had understood, later, that knowing the language was not the same as having the values the language was supposed to represent. But she had not understood it then. She had not seen it clearly because she was not required to assess him. She was required to love him. And love was a different instrument with different calibration. And she had not thought to apply her professional calibration to a man she was choosing rather than encountering. The erosion had taken 2 years to become visible to her, and 1 more year to become visible enough to name. The naming had been the hardest part. Not because she didn't have the words. She had every word. She had built her career on the words. But because the words, applied to herself, required her to accept that she had been the woman across the table. That the training that was supposed to protect her had not protected her. That competence in understanding a thing was not immunity from the thing. And that the shame of that gap, the professional who did not see it in her own house, in her own marriage, in the man who slept in her bed, was its own specific punishment that she had been administering to herself every day for a year. She had called the Thursday counselor. She had called her sister. She had made a plan, the correct plan, the plan she would have helped any of her clients make. The documents, the account, the bag, the number memorized. On the night she had dialed wrong, the plan had been 6 weeks from execution. The incident had not waited for the plan. She had been in the bathroom with the towel bar under the door handle, shaking, the adrenaline shaking, not the afraid shaking, the distinction mattering to her professionally, if not in the moment. And she had dialed the wrong number, and a man she did not know had said, "Send me the address," and she had sent it. And 17 minutes later, the door of her building had opened, and 2 men she had never seen had come in and had taken her out of it in the manner of people who had been told exactly one thing: bring her here and bring her safely. The apartment was gone. Marcus was gone. She was in a corridor in the Gold Coast with her assessment running at full capacity and a man at the end of it waiting to see what she did next. She had sent the address. That was the decision. Everything after it was information. Story deepen, the hero's wound. Gio Seo kept a ledger that had no physical form. He had kept it since he was 24 years old, which was the year a woman named Ji Soo had come to him with a bruise at her temple, and a specific, matter-of-fact quality of asking for help that he had since learned was what courage looked like when it had been surviving a long time and no longer had the energy for performance. Ji Soo had been connected to his world through her brother, who worked a distribution route, and she had come to Gio because her brother had told her to come to Gio. And Gio had done what he had understood, at 24, to be the correct and sufficient thing. He had given her money and a contact at a private apartment and the name of a man who owed him a favor, who could handle the paperwork she needed. He had given her resources. He had not given her refuge. The distinction had not been clear to him at 24. It had become clear to him 4 weeks later, when the man Jisoo had been running from located the private apartment through the paperwork contact, whose discretion had not been as absolute as Gio had been told, and Jisoo had not survived the locating. He had been 24. He had sat with what had happened, not in a room with other people, not with the benefit of the kind of counsel that would have told him that he was young and had done his best and could not have known, but alone, in the specific way of a man who held himself to an accounting with no appeals process. He had decided, in that sitting, that the difference between resources and refuge was a distinction he would never make incorrectly again. He had kept the ledger since then. Not written, not spoken. Carried every person who had come to him in the specific condition of someone whose danger was real and immediate and required more than money and a contact, he had responded to with the full weight of what he had available, not the partial weight of what was convenient. He was 35 now. He had been running the organization for 6 years. He was precise and controlled and possessed of a reputation that required no maintenance because it was built on consistent outcomes rather than performance. He did not do things for appearance. He did things because the ledger required them, and the ledger's requirements had not changed since he was 24. His phone rang at 2:19 a.m. with a number he did not recognize. He answered because he always answered numbers he did not recognize. He heard breathing, a specific kind of breathing, controlled at the surface, the deliberate management of an inhale and exhale by someone who needed to keep the inhale and exhale deliberate, or it would become something else. Under the breathing, a television, muffled, and the particular acoustic quality of a small tiled room, a bathroom. He did not say, "Who is this?" or "I think you have the wrong number." He said, "Don't hang up." He said it because he knew what he was hearing. He had heard it before. The 4 words he said after, "Send me the address," were not an impulse. They were the correct response to a specific set of inputs, the response he had calibrated over 11 years since Jisoo. The response that did not calculate the cost or the complication or the question of who this woman was and what her life contained, and whether her situation was the kind of situation that cleanly resolved. None of that was the relevant information. The relevant information was a woman in a bathroom with a towel bar under the door handle and a choice between "Send me the address and I'll let the ledger stay open another way." The ledger was not going to stay open another way. He kept his coat on for 2 hours. He was still wearing it when the elevator opened and she stepped out of it and looked at him with the specific, assessing look of a woman whose brain had not stopped running even when everything else had. He understood in the first 3 seconds of seeing her that whatever he had expected, it was not this. Forced proximity. The competence ladder she slept for 4 hours. He did not expect her to sleep. The operational assumption for the night had been a woman in acute distress requiring immediate stabilization and extended monitoring, a known set of variables with a known response protocol. He had arranged the guest room because it was there, and because it was the most dignified available option, and because dignity in the accounting he kept was a resource rather than a luxury. She had walked into the guest room, set her bag, small. The bag of a woman who had a bag ready, which he noted and filed, on the chair, looked at the room with the assessing sweep he had observed in the corridor, and said, "Is there a lock on this door?" "Yes," he said, "from the inside." Yes, she had nodded once. She had closed the door. He had heard the lock turn. He had gone to his office and worked until the city outside the windows began its pale 6 a.m. adjustment from dark to gray, and at 6:15 the guest room door had opened and she had come into the kitchen and looked at the coffee maker with the look of a woman identifying a resource. Cabinet above, he said, without turning from the window. She found the coffee. She made it. She sat at the kitchen island with both hands around the mug, and she looked at him with the quality of assessment he had clocked from the first moment in the corridor. Specific, thorough. The assessment of a person who was reading a room and had the training to read it accurately. "You run something," she said. "Yes, something that requires people in a lobby who aren't doormen." "Yes." "And men who can remove a person from an apartment at 2:30 in the morning without involving the police." He turned from the window and looked at her. She held the look evenly. She was not performing bravery. He had seen performed bravery, and it had a specific quality that was not present here. This was the real variety, the kind that had been built through years of required precision, the kind that did not need the audience's reassurance to keep standing. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She looked at the coffee. "My husband is in a conversation," he said, "that will conclude with him understanding that the apartment, the joint accounts, and the question of your location are no longer variables he has access to. The conversation is being conducted by people who are good at this kind of conversation." She was quiet for a moment. "He'll look for me. He won't find you. You don't know him. I know the type," he said. "And the type runs on the assumption that no one will intervene. Once that assumption is incorrect, the calculus changes." He looked at her steadily. "He will not find you." She held her mug. She was doing something behind her eyes that he could not fully read, not the flat processing of shock which he recognized, but something more active, something running. "The 2 men you sent," she said, "last night. They came in through the front. Yes, the building has a service entrance on the east side. If Marcus had gone out through the service entrance, one of them was already there," he said. She looked at him. "You sent 3. I sent 4, he said. Something in her expression moved, a brief, involuntary thing, the look of someone encountering thoroughness in a place they had learned not to expect it. "Why 4? She said. "Because the address told me the building type, and the building type told me the exit options, and 4 was the correct number for the exit options." He held her gaze. "I've done this before." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You've done this before. Specifically this. A woman in danger, an address, the middle of the night." "Yes, how many times?" "Enough," he said, "that I have a system." She looked at her coffee. She looked at the window. She looked at him. "The system works." "When I apply it correctly," he said, "yes." She heard the qualifier. He saw her hear it. She did not ask about it, which was the response of a person who understood that there were things in this kitchen that were not her business, and who was also, he understood, filing it for later. She was. He was becoming aware, one of the most thorough people he had encountered in a long time. "I need to call my sister," she said. "There's a phone on the desk in the office," he said. "Not traceable to this address." She looked at him for one more beat. Then she got up, took her coffee, and went to find the office. He found her 2 hours later, still in the office. Not on the phone. The call to her sister had apparently concluded, because the phone was in its cradle. She was at the desk with a legal pad and a pen that she had found in the drawer, and she was writing in the fast, compressed handwriting of someone who thought faster than most pens allowed and had learned to compress rather than slow down. He stood in the doorway. She did not look up. "Your operation," she said. "The men in the lobby. The key elevator. The men last night. The one on the service exit specifically. The one who I didn't see until we were outside and he was already positioned." She paused. "You don't run this like someone who inherited it and kept the structure intact." He was quiet. "You redesigned the proximity protocols," she said. The inherited version of an operation like yours keeps its dangerous assets close to the center. You've pushed them outward. She looked up. You run the center clean, and you push the risk to the perimeter where it doesn't contaminate the core. That's not the traditional model. He looked at the legal pad, at the compressed handwriting, at the diagram she had drawn. Not precise, not architectural, but structurally accurate in a way that required understanding the logic of the thing rather than observing its physical details. How do you know what the traditional model looks like? He said. 6 years of DV advocacy, she said. Every woman I sat across from had been inside a version of a power structure before she came to me. Intimate partner violence runs on the same dynamics as organized power, coercion, isolation, the management of information, the weaponization of loyalty. The structures are different in scale. They are not different in kind. She looked at him. You've changed yours. I've tried to, he said. Why? He looked at the legal pad, at the diagram, at the woman who had drawn an accurate map of the logic of his operation from a guest room, a kitchen, and a 2-hour observation window. Sit down, he said. She looked at him. Please, he said. She sat. He told her about Jisoo. Not all of it. Not the parts that required the full accounting of who he had been at 24, the structural facts. A woman, a connection, a decision to give resources instead of refuge, and the outcome that had permanently changed the meaning of the word enough in every context he applied it. She listened with the quality of listening that he had not encountered from anyone who was not a professional at listening. Still, complete. Without the reflexive filling in, the sympathetic interjections, the performance of reception. She simply received it. When he finished, she said, You built the system to fix the original error. Yes, but you built it for strangers, she said. You didn't build it for the people inside your organization. He went still. Jisoo was connected through her brother, she said, which means she was adjacent to your world, but not inside it. The women inside it, the ones connected to your men, to the structure itself, they don't use the system. Because using the system requires going to you, and going to you means going through the structure that their situation is embedded in. She held his gaze. That's the gap. That's where the original error still lives. He was very quiet. You can't fix it from the top, she said. You need a lateral access point. Something that isn't you and isn't the chain of command. Something that functions like the advocacy network I used to run, independent enough that using it isn't a declaration, isn't a loyalty test, isn't visible to the people the woman is running from. She picked up the pen. She looked at the diagram. She looked at him. I could design that, she said. Rising tension, second competence reveal. The meeting happened on a Thursday. She had been in the building for 5 days. She had asked, on day 2, whether she was required to stay, and he had said no. You can leave whenever you want, with the specific flatness of someone stating a fact they found mildly uncomfortable. And she had looked at the city from the window of the office, where she had taken up a quiet residence among the legal pads and the good desk lamp. And she had said, I have nowhere to go yet, and he had said, I know, and neither of them had made it into more than it was. She had spent the 5 days doing 3 things: sleeping, which her body required, and which she gave it without apology, calling her sister, who was managing the practical geometry of extraction, the documents, the account access, the attorney, and working on the diagram. It had expanded across 3 legal pads by Thursday morning. It was not a diagram anymore. It was a framework, the design of a lateral access structure that would function within the existing organization without being visible to the existing organization. that would give women adjacent to the operation a route to safety that did not require them to perform loyalty or absorb risk. She had built it the same way she had built the shelter network's intake protocols, with the methodology of someone who understood that the system existed to serve the person who needed it, and not the convenience of the system's operators. On Thursday, 2 of his senior people came to the office. She was introduced as someone Gio trusted, not explained, not categorized. She had noticed he did not categorize her, and she had filed it without comment. The first man, Park, she learned, 50s, precise, the senior operations person, had looked at the legal pads with the expression of a man encountering something that should not be present and was deciding what to do about its presence. She had walked him through the framework. She did not ask his permission to walk him through it. She presented it the way she had presented intake redesigns to shelter boards, as the correct solution to a documented problem, with the evidence base for both the problem and the solution available for review. Park had looked at Gio once. Gio had said nothing. Park had looked back at the legal pads. He had said, after a silence that had a specific evaluating quality, the lateral access point. If it's truly independent of the chain, we have no visibility into who uses it. Correct, she said. We have no visibility into what leaves through it. Correct, she said. That's the point. The moment you have visibility, the women inside the structure know you have visibility, and the access point becomes the chain of command. It stops working. Park looked at her for a long moment. You understand, he said carefully, that an access point we have no visibility into is also an access point that could carry things we don't authorize. Yes, she said. And that's a risk you accept in exchange for it functioning, the same way a DV shelter accepts that a woman might lie about her situation in order to provide safety for the women who aren't lying. She held his gaze. You don't get the benefit without accepting the exposure. If you're not willing to accept the exposure, you don't build the system, and the gap stays open. Park looked at Gio again. This time Gio said, She's right. The second man, younger, quieter, the operational detail person who had not spoken until now, looked up from the legal pads and said, Who runs it? She had anticipated this question. She had the answer prepared not because she had decided to insert herself, but because the framework's logic led to it the way a proof led to its conclusion. Someone who isn't inside the chain of command, she said. Someone with crisis intervention training and existing DV advocacy contacts. Someone whose independence from the organization is verifiable by the women who would use the system, so they trust it. She paused. Someone who has already used it herself. The room was quiet. Park looked at Gio. Gio was looking at her. You're describing yourself, Park said. I'm describing the qualifications the role requires, she said. I happen to meet them. External threat. Marcus found the building on day 8. Not her specifically. He found the building through the kind of persistent, systematic searching that she had seen before in men of his type. The kind that did not accept no longer accessible as a terminal condition, but treated it as a temporary obstacle requiring more effort. He had found the building through her sister's phone records, which he had accessed through the carrier account that was still technically jointly held, and through a conversation with her coworker that she had not known to warn the coworker about, because she had not thought he would go there. He had stood outside the building for 40 minutes, she was told, and then he had left. He had not come in. This was because of the lobby. She understood this before Gio explained it. He told her at 9 p.m. She had been in the office with the legal pads when he came in and stood in the doorway, and she had looked at his face, and had known from the quality of his stillness. She had learned his stillnesses now. The varieties of them, their different textures, that it was not a routine update. He told her. She absorbed it. "He'll come back," she said. "Not tonight. He'll come back when he thinks he's found a better approach." "Yes," Gio said. "What's the better approach he finds?" "In my assessment," Gio said, "he looks for a legal mechanism, a welfare check, a claim of concern for your well-being, something that requires the building to respond to official inquiry. He doesn't have grounds for that." "I left voluntarily. I'm not a missing person." "No," Gio said. "But men of his type are very good at constructing the appearance of grounds." He looked at her. "He's been calling your sister 3 times a day since day 4. She felt the particular cold that came with this information, not fear. She had largely moved past the acute fear of the first night into something more functional. But the specific cold of understanding that the thing you knew was coming was now on a defined timeline. "She won't tell him anything. I know. I've ensured she has support." A pause. "With her knowledge and consent." She looked at him. "You talked to my sister." "My people did." "She asked for verification of who we were." He paused. "She asked a lot of questions." She was satisfied with the answers, the faintest change in his expression, the movement she had learned to identify as his version of something warmer than his default register. "She said to tell you that you always did have terrible taste in phone contacts." Danielle looked at the desk. The legal pads. The framework she had been building for 8 days in this office. She thought about Marcus in the lobby, about the systematic quality of the searching, about the fact that she had 6 years of professional experience with exactly this kind of searching and knew precisely how it escalated. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No," Gio said. "Which means this address is a temporary solution." "Yes." She looked at him. "What's the permanent one?" He came into the office fully, not the doorway, the room, and he sat down in the chair across the desk in the way she had come to recognize as his version of deliberate informality, the choice to be in the same space rather than the managed space of a doorway or a threshold. "There are 2 options," he said. "The first is legal and slow, and depends on his making an error that creates the documentation required to make his access to your location a matter of legal record rather than personal discretion." He paused. "He will make that error. Men like this always make it. The timeline is uncertain." "And the second option?" "The second option," he said, "is that Marcus understands, in a way that is not legal and is not slow, that the cost of continuing to search is greater than the cost of stopping." She looked at him. "I'm not going to make that decision without telling you what it means," he said, "and I'm not going to execute it without your understanding of what it means. You are not someone I do things around. You are someone I do things with, or not at all." She was very still. "He hurt you," Gio said. "He will try to find you. He will not stop trying to find you unless something makes the trying more costly than the outcome. In my world, I can make things costly. But it is your life and your decision, and I will not move until you tell me to move or tell me to stand down, and I will accept either." She looked at the desk, at the legal pads, at the framework for the things she had designed in 8 days, in an office that was not hers, in a building that was not hers, in a life that was currently the suspended version of itself, waiting to find out what shape the next version would take. She thought about Ji-Soo, whose story she now knew. She thought about the gap between resources and refuge, and what it cost to stand in that gap and be wrong. She thought about 4 words on a phone at 2:19 in the morning. She looked up. "Tell me exactly what it means," she said. "All of it. Then I'll decide." The declaration he told her. All of it, not the version calibrated for a civilian who needed protection from the truth of what her protection required. The full account. What his people would do. How it would be done. What Marcus would understand afterward, and what the permanent condition of understanding would look like. She listened in the way she listened to everything, completely, with the stillness of someone whose training had made her a container for difficult information, someone who did not flinch from the thing itself, but from the making of decisions about it. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "The shelter network I worked for. For 6 years, we helped women leave. The system was correct, legal, documented, resource-based. It worked for most of the women, most of the time." She paused. There were women it didn't work for. Women whose situations required a certainty that the legal system couldn't provide. I used to tell myself that the legal system was the only correct tool. She looked at her hands. "I'm not sure I believed that the whole time." He said nothing. "I'm not going to tell you to do something specific," she said. "I'm going to tell you that I trust your judgment about what this situation requires. That's a different thing." She looked at him. "I want to be clear about the difference." "I understand the difference," he said. "If I didn't believe you were the right person to make this judgment," she said, "I wouldn't be giving it to you." He looked at her for a moment that was dense with the full weight of the 8 days, the bathroom, the address, the lobby, the coffee, the legal pads, the diagram, the framework, the conversation about Jisoo, the Thursday meeting, the sister's message, all of it present in the room between them, accounted for, not resolved, but held. "I want to tell you something," he said, "that is not about Marcus, and is not about the organization, and is not about the framework." He paused. "It's about the call." She waited. "When you called," he said, "and I heard what I heard, the breathing, the room, I did not think about cost or complication or who you were or what your situation contained. I thought about Jisoo. I have thought about Jisoo every time in 11 years that I have applied the system. She is the reason the system exists." He looked at her directly. "And then I met you, and I have spent 8 days in this building, unable to think about Jisoo when I look at you. Which I want you to understand is a significant change in my experience of my own life." She was very still. "I'm not telling you this as pressure," he said. "I'm not telling you this because the situation requires it. I'm telling you because you are, of all the people I have encountered in this work and in this life, the person I am least capable of being indirect with, and indirection would be a form of disrespect I'm not willing to offer you." He held her gaze. "You came to me as someone in need of protection. You are not, as it turns out, only that. And the distinction matters to me, and I want you to know it matters." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "You built a system for women who needed it. You have been running the system for 11 years because of a 24-year-old's decision that you have not forgiven yourself for." She paused. "Jisoo needed refuge, and you gave her resources, and she died in the gap. I know that. I know what that carries." She held his gaze. "I also know that the man who has spent 11 years building a better answer is not the same man who made the original error. And the original error, in the full account, was made by someone who didn't know yet what he was supposed to know." His face was not open, exactly. The face of a man who had been very carefully managed for a long time and was, in this specific room, with this specific woman, considering the possibility of a different arrangement. "I called the wrong number," she said. "Or, I called the right one." She paused. "I haven't decided which, yet. But I'm deciding." The choice 2 weeks later, she moved out of the building, into an apartment 6 blocks away. Her own lease, her own name on the documents, her own key. A second-floor apartment with a window that faced east, and a kitchen that had good light in the morning, which was the thing she had decided mattered most when she was looking. Her sister had helped her move in. Her sister had also, upon meeting Gio briefly in the lobby of the Gold Coast building on the day of the move, given him a long, assessing look that Danielle recognized as the family version of her own professional assessment, and then said to Danielle privately, "He's the kind of careful that costs something. Make sure you know what it costs." Danielle had thought about that. She had thought about it for 3 days, in the east-facing kitchen with the good morning light, before she called him. Not from his office phone. From her own phone, the new number. The one that only 7 people had. She had given him the number when she left, because he had asked for it with a specific, unembellished directness that she had come to understand is simply how he asked for things he wanted. No performance, no indirection, just the request and the willingness to receive whatever answer came back. He answered on the second ring. She said, "The framework. I want to move forward with it," he said. "I know. Park filed the implementation request yesterday." She paused. "Without my confirmation?" "With my confirmation," he said. "I told him it was moving forward. I was prepared to be wrong about your decision. I was not prepared to let the gap stay open while I waited to find out." She looked at her kitchen wall. The paint was an off-white that was warm in the morning light and cool in the afternoon. She had chosen it from a sample card because it was the color of a room she wanted to be in. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." "The lateral access point is mine. Not nominally mine, operationally mine. I run the intake, I run the assessments, I run the decisions about who gets what kind of support and when. You fund it and you guarantee the operational capability, and you stay out of the case files." "Agreed. If I find at any point that the independence has been compromised, if I find visibility I didn't authorize, if I find decisions being made above me about cases under me, I shut it down and I walk." "Agreed." She paused. "And the other thing?" "A beat. The thing that isn't the framework," she said. "I'm not deciding that today. I'm deciding the framework today. The other thing I'm deciding on my own schedule, when I have enough information, when I've been in enough rooms with you to know what I'm actually looking at." He was quiet for a moment. "That," he said, "is an entirely fair condition." "I know it is," she said. "I wrote the framework. I know how to design an access protocol." There was a pause that she could feel across the phone, a pause with something warm in it, something that was not quite laughter, but occupied the space where laughter would have been in a man who had a freer relationship with it. "Thursday," he said. "The first case review, 9 a.m. I'll be there at 8:45, she said. "I run my own schedule." "I know," he said. She hung up. She stood in her kitchen in the east light, and she looked at the color of the wall she had chosen, and she thought about 4 words on a phone at 2:19 in the morning, and about the specific, irreducible weight of a decision made in a bathroom with a towel bar under the door handle that had turned out to be the most consequential decision of a life she was, as of this morning, in the process of building back. She had called the wrong number. She was no longer sure it was wrong. Emotional resolution. The first morning she woke up in the new apartment without checking the door. She did not notice that she had not checked the door until she was already in the kitchen making coffee. She stood with the coffee maker running, and she registered the absence of the checking, the specific, automatic 3-year ritual of coming awake into threat assessment, the inventory of sound and silence and the quality of the door. And she felt the absence of it the way you felt the absence of a weight you had carried long enough to forget you were carrying it. Not light, exactly. Just different. Like a room after the furniture has been moved. The same room, the same proportions, the same walls, but the air moving through it differently now. She took her coffee to the east window. Chicago in December from the second floor looked exactly like Chicago in December from any other floor. The gray sky, the particular stubborn cold. The city going about its business with the pragmatic indifference to weather that cities with winters developed or did not survive. The tree on the street below had lost its leaves and was standing in its own bare architecture, which was, she had always thought, the most honest a tree ever looked. Everything stripped. Just the structure. Just the shape of what it actually was. She thought about the framework. About the Thursday morning. About the 8 women currently in the intake system, at various points in the process she had designed, moving through it at the pace it required. She thought about a man who had built a system for 11 years because of a decision he had made at 24, and who had told her about it without softening it, and who had agreed to her conditions in the order she had stated them without negotiating, and who had said, "You are not someone I do things around," and had meant it in every way she had subsequently tested it. She thought about what her sister had said. The kind of careful that costs something. She thought, yes. And the cost was knowable, and the cost was survivable, and she had been assessing risk professionally for 6 years, and she knew how to look at something clearly and determine whether the exposure was worth the return. She had her assessment. She had had it for several days. She was just, as she had told him, on her own schedule. She picked up her phone. She sent him a message. Thursday, 9 a.m. I'll be there at 8:45. Don't move the 9 o'clock, but clear the 8. She put the phone down. Outside, the bare tree stood in its honest architecture. Everything visible, nothing hidden. Just the structure and the shape and the form of the thing that it actually was all along. She drank her coffee. She did not check the door. She called the wrong number. He said the right 4 words, and somewhere between the address she sent and the framework she built, she stopped surviving long enough to understand that this was what arriving looked like. My deep feelers and midnight faithful, if this story sat with you somewhere real, you know what to do. Drop your city in the comments. I need the full map of where this family lives. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that the wrong number sometimes reaches the right place. Next time, the first case under the framework is a woman whose situation Danielle recognizes with a precision that makes it personal. And Gio Seo is about to find out that the most dangerous thing in his world is a woman who knows exactly what she's looking at and has decided to look.